I stood in the parking garage at midnight, holding a laptop bag and a termination letter, watching through the office windows as emergency lights flashed and security guards rushed between floors. My phone buzzed with the 15th missed call from my former manager. I deleted the voicemail without listening, knowing exactly what desperation sounds like. 36 hours ago, they called me easily replaceable. Now, their billion-dollar construction empire teetered on complete collapse, and I held the only key to their survival in my memory. My name is Randy, and at 28 years old, I had spent 5 incredible years as senior project coordinator at Meridian Construction Group in Dallas, Texas. Every morning, I walked through those gleaming office doors, knowing that my work kept 2,000 field workers employed across 12 states. The custom database systems I had built from scratch managed everything from weekly crew schedules to complex payroll calculations that prevented costly project delays. Those early morning hours were my favorite time. The office buzzed with quiet energy as I pulled up spreadsheets that most people would find mind-numbingly complex. But to me, they represented puzzles waiting to be solved. Each cell contained a worker's livelihood, a family's mortgage payment, a child's college fund. When I matched the right crew to the right project with the right timeline, I was literally putting food on tables across America. Jake Sullivan, our gruff site foreman with calloused hands and a heart of gold, relied on my weekly crew schedules like clockwork. Every Friday at precisely 3 p.m., he would lumber into my cubicle, coffee-stained hard hat tucked under his arm, waiting for the printouts that would determine where his team's work the following week. Jake had been with Meridian for 17 years, and he trusted my numbers more than his own instincts. "Randy, you got magic in those fingers," he would say, studying the carefully color-coded charts I prepared. "Never seen anyone juggle this many moving pieces without dropping something important." What Jake and most others didn't realize was that my systems prevented millions of dollars in project delays annually. When a crew showed up at the wrong site, it cost the company approximately $15,000 per day. When payroll calculations were incorrect, federal compliance issues could shut down entire operations. My innovative tracking systems caught these problems before they became disasters. But recently, Patricia Hendricks had become my direct manager. Patricia was 45 years old, recently promoted from regional sales, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never actually managed complex operations. During team meetings, she started questioning my methods with thinly veiled skepticism. "Are we sure these manual processes are the most efficient approach?" Patricia would ask, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "Perhaps we should explore more modern solutions that don't require such specialized knowledge." Her comments about fresh perspectives and streamlined approaches began appearing in every conversation. I watched her build alliances with newer employees, the ones who nodded enthusiastically when she talked about leveraging cutting-edge technologies and eliminating bottlenecks caused by outdated thinking. The shift in office politics was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia's dismissive tone when discussing my contributions grew more pronounced each week. She would interrupt my explanations during presentations, suggesting that anyone with basic software skills could handle coordination tasks. The respect I had earned over 5 years started crumbling under her relentless campaign to diminish my expertise. Then came the monthly review meeting that changed everything. Patricia announced that she had been conducting a thorough evaluation of operational efficiency and had identified several redundancies in current staffing structures. She spoke about modernizing outdated processes, while her eyes lingered on me with unmistakable meaning. "We need to think strategically about our human resources." Patricia continued shuffling papers with theatrical importance. "Some positions have become too dependent on individual knowledge rather than systematic approaches that anyone can implement." The room fell silent. Everyone knew she was talking about me, but nobody dared make eye contact. Patricia's smile was cold and calculated as she delivered the crushing revelation that would destroy my world. She had already been interviewing replacement candidates without telling anyone. The decision to eliminate my position had been made weeks ago, and this meeting was just theater. The following Friday, Patricia called an unscheduled team meeting that sent anxiety rippling through our department. She stood at the front of the conference room with barely contained excitement, like a child about to unveil a surprise gift that nobody wanted. I have some exciting news about changes that will revolutionize how we approach project coordination. Patricia began, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. We're embracing innovation and bringing fresh energy to processes that have become stagnant. She gestured dramatically toward the door as it opened to reveal a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive business suit that screamed fresh graduate. Patricia's smile widened as she introduced Madison Foster, 22 years old, recent graduate from the University of Texas Business Program with a degree in organizational management. Madison brings cutting-edge project management software expertise, Patricia announced, reading from prepared notes. Her background in digital transformation strategies will help us modernize legacy systems that have been holding us back. Madison stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never encountered real workplace complexity. Her resume, which Patricia read aloud like a sacred text, boasted experience with innovative approaches to legacy system modernization and streamlined workflow optimization protocols. Every buzzword felt like a dagger aimed directly at my 5 years of proven success. Madison will be implementing new systems that anyone can operate. Patricia continued, her emphasis on the word anyone, unmistakably directed at me. No more dependency on specialized knowledge that creates vulnerabilities in our operations. The assignment came as no surprise. I would train Madison on basic procedures over the following 2 weeks. Patricia framed it as a collaborative transition, but everyone in the room understood the subtext. Madison was my replacement, and my role in training her was essentially teaching someone else to do my job before being shown the door. Madison's first week revealed the depth of her inexperience. She dismissed my custom database as unnecessarily complicated and suggested switching to generic software packages that normal people can understand without extensive training. When I tried explaining the complexity of multi-state payroll regulations, she interrupted with suggestions about simplifying processes and reducing bureaucratic overhead. Why do you need all these different calculations? Madison asked, staring at my monitor with obvious confusion. Can't we just use one standard formula for everyone? I patiently explained that construction workers in Texas had different tax withholdings than those in Colorado, and that federal regulations required specific documentation for interstate projects. Madison nodded absently, clearly more interested in implementing her theoretical knowledge than understanding practical realities. The veteran employees watched this transition with growing concern. Jake Sullivan cornered me by the coffee machine one afternoon, his weathered face creased with worry. Something feels wrong about these changes, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure Patricia wasn't listening. That new girl doesn't understand what you actually do here. She thinks managing people is the same as managing spreadsheets. Brenda Martinez from accounting shared similar concerns when we passed in the hallway. Brenda had worked with my systems for 3 years and understood their complexity better than most. Madison asked me yesterday why we need separate codes for each state, Brenda whispered. When I started explaining compliance requirements, she just said we should streamline everything into one simple system. I don't think she realizes that would be completely illegal. Meanwhile, Madison was alienating other veteran employees with the condescending remarks about old-school methods and resistance to change. She spoke about efficiency improvements without understanding current processes, suggesting solutions to problems that didn't exist, while ignoring real challenges that kept our operations running smoothly. During Madison's second week, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Patricia had already given Madison my office keycard and computer passwords. When I questioned this decision, Patricia's response was swift and brutal. Madison will be taking over primary responsibilities effective immediately, she said with icy satisfaction. We need to ensure a smooth transition without any disruptions caused by territorial behavior. The shocking revelation hit me like a physical blow. Patricia hadn't been planning to add help or create a partnership. She had been plotting to eliminate my position entirely, and Madison wasn't my assistant but my complete replacement. Everything I had built over 5 years was about to be handed to someone who didn't understand the first thing about what I actually did. Monday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. I organized my desk-reviewed weekend reports and prepared for what I assumed would be a routine check-in with Patricia. When her assistant called asking me to come to her office immediately, I thought perhaps she wanted to discuss Madison's training progress or address some of the concerns other employees had raised. Patricia's office felt different as I walked through the door. The familiar family photos and motivational posters seemed to leer at me with newfound hostility. She sat behind her mahogany desk like a judge, preparing to deliver a sentence, her hands folded with theatrical precision. "Please sit down," Patricia said, her voice carrying an undertone that made my stomach clench with dread. I settled into the chair across from her desk, the same chair where I had received praise for successful projects and discussed career advancement opportunities. Today it felt like an electric chair. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our conversation regarding operational efficiency." Patricia began her words measured and deliberate. "After careful consideration and consultation with upper management, we've reached some important conclusions about restructuring this department." The room seemed to shrink around me as Patricia's smile turned predatory. She reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a manila folder that would change everything. "The truth is, Randy, you're easily replaceable." The words hit me like bullets, each syllable designed for maximum damage. Madison brings fresh ideas and modern systems thinking that, frankly, you just don't possess. Your approaches are outdated, overly complicated, and honestly unnecessary in today's business environment. I felt the blood drain from my face as Patricia continued her calculated destruction of everything I had worked to build. "We've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately," she said, sliding the folder across her desk. "Madison will figure things out independently. She doesn't need the institutional baggage that's been weighing down our productivity." The termination letter felt surreal in my hands. 5 years of dedication, innovation, and success reduced to corporate boilerplate about position elimination and organizational restructuring. Patricia's words about me being easily swappable echoed in my mind like a cruel mantra. "Security will escort you to collect your personal items," Patricia continued with obvious satisfaction. "We need to ensure a clean break without any disruptions to ongoing operations. Madison is eager to implement her new systems without interference from old methodologies." The next 30 minutes passed in a humiliating blur. A security guard followed me to my desk as curious colleagues watched from their cubicles. Years of personal photographs, coffee mugs, and desk accessories went into a cardboard box, while people I considered friends averted their eyes in embarrassment. Jake Sullivan stood near the water cooler, his face red with barely controlled anger as he watched the proceedings. Brenda Martinez looked like she wanted to cry. Other employees whispered among themselves, clearly shocked by the sudden turn of events. The final indignity came when Patricia personally appeared to reclaim my company credit card and building key card. She held out her hand with theatrical authority, as if I might try to steal office supplies on my way out. "Your badge, please," she said loud enough for nearby employees to hear. I removed the plastic card that had granted me access to the building for 5 years. It felt strange in my palm, this small rectangle that represented my professional identity and daily routine. Instead of arguing or protesting, I handed it over without saying a word. My silence seemed to unnerve Patricia more than any confrontation would have. The walk through the lobby was the longest journey of my professional life. Former colleagues pretended to be busy with their phones or paperwork, unable to meet my eyes as I carried my boxed belongings toward the parking garage. The security guard followed dutifully, ensuring I didn't cause any disruptions on my way out. As I reached my car, I realized Patricia's eagerness to prove my replaceability had created a dangerous gap in operations. She had locked me out of all systems immediately, even before Madison had logged in for her first official day as my replacement. In her rush to demonstrate that I was easily swappable, Patricia had created a situation where nobody had access to critical systems during the weekend when crucial Monday morning payroll processes needed to run. The irony was almost too perfect. In her desperate attempt to prove I was replaceable, Patricia had inadvertently proven exactly the opposite. Monday morning brought crisp autumn air and the kind of clear skies that usually filled me with optimism. But I wasn't heading to Meridian Construction anymore. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table in pajamas drinking coffee and scrolling through job listings while wondering how Patricia and Madison were handling their first day without me. I didn't have to wonder long. At Meridian's downtown office, Madison Foster arrived at 7:30 a.m., wearing another expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most workers made in a week. She settled into what had been my desk, surrounded by the complex systems that had taken me years to develop and perfect. Patricia watched from her office window as Madison booted up my computer, confident that her brilliant hiring decision would immediately validate her management philosophy. Madison pulled up the main database interface and stared at screens filled with interconnected spreadsheets, automated calculations, and custom-coded formulas that looked like hieroglyphics to someone with her background. No problem, Madison muttered to herself, clicking through various programs. How hard can this be? The first sign of trouble came when Madison tried to access the payroll processing system that needed to run by 9 a.m. for direct deposits to go through on Tuesday. The login screen appeared normally, but when she entered the temporary passwords Patricia had provided, red error messages flashed across her monitor. Access denied, user credentials not recognized. Madison tried different password combinations, assuming she had mistyped something. Each attempt resulted in the same error message. Growing frustrated, she called Patricia's extension. There seems to be some kind of technical glitch, Madison explained. I can't get into the payroll system. Patricia hurried down from her office, confident this was just a minor hiccup that would be resolved quickly. She stood behind Madison's chair, watching as error messages multiplied across the screen. Try using Randy's old login information, Patricia suggested. I thought you said her access was terminated, Madison replied. It was, but maybe it hasn't updated everything yet. They spent the next hour calling the information technology support desk, only to discover that my access had been completely removed from all systems as Patricia had requested. The problem was that nobody had properly transferred my custom database credentials to Madison's new user profile. How long will it take to restore access? Patricia asked the IT technician. Well, that depends on which systems we're talking about, came the unhelpful response. Some of these databases were custom built, and we don't have documentation about how they interface with our main network. By 10 a.m., automated payroll calculations that should have been running for 2 hours were completely stalled. Field supervisors began calling the main office, asking for updated crew assignments that should have been distributed at 8 a.m. Madison stared at her computer screen like it was written in ancient Sanskrit. I don't understand why everything is so complicated, Madison complained to Patricia. In business school, they taught us that efficient systems should be user-friendly and intuitive. What Madison didn't realize was that my systems were incredibly user-friendly for people who understood construction industry regulations. The complexity wasn't arbitrary, but reflected the real-world challenges of managing multi-state operations with thousands of variables. Safety compliance reports that needed to be generated every Monday morning were frozen mid-process. The system had started its automated routines, but couldn't complete calculations without proper user verification. Jake Sullivan called from a job site in Oklahoma, frustrated because his crew assignment showed outdated information. Where's Randy? Jake demanded when Patricia answered his call. My guys are standing around with their thumbs up their rear ends because nobody knows which equipment they're supposed to be using today. Madison is handling coordination now, Patricia replied with forced confidence. She'll have everything sorted out shortly. Well, she better figure it out fast because I've got 37 workers billing overtime while they wait for somebody to tell them what they're supposed to be doing. By noon, Madison was openly crying at her desk. The business school software solutions she had suggested proved completely incompatible with Meridian's existing infrastructure. Generic project management programs couldn't interface with specialized construction databases. Her streamlined approaches had streamlined operations right into complete dysfunction. Patricia's confident morning had devolved into panicked phone calls to various technical support departments. Each conversation revealed new layers of complexity that neither she nor Madison had anticipated. The custom integration between payroll system safety compliance databases and project management tools wasn't just convenient, but legally required for multi-state construction operations. How was Randy managing all this by herself? Madison asked through her tears. She wasn't managing it, Patricia snapped, her frustration boiling over. She was just maintaining old, inefficient systems that were going to improve. But improvement seemed increasingly unlikely as error messages continued cascading across multiple computer screens. By 5 p.m. Monday, Patricia received a call that made her blood run cold. Miss Hendricks, this is Robert Chen from Techstar Energy, the voice said. We're having some concerns about missing compliance documentation that should have been submitted this morning. Our contract requires daily safety reports, and we haven't received anything from your team today. Techstar Energy was Meridian's largest client, representing over $40 million in annual revenue. Their contracts contained strict compliance clauses that allowed immediate termination for documentation failures. I'm sure it's just a minor delay, Patricia stammered. We'll have everything to you first thing tomorrow morning. Ms. Hendricks, this isn't a minor delay. This is a breach of our agreement. If we don't receive proper documentation within 24 hours, we'll need to consider suspending operations pending a full review of your compliance capabilities. As Patricia hung up the phone, she realized with growing horror that my systems hadn't been just convenient tools, but legally required safeguards. Without them, Meridian faced potential government investigation and industry blacklisting. The woman she had dismissed as easily replaceable had been the only thing standing between the company and regulatory disaster. Tuesday morning brought no relief, only escalating catastrophe that spread through Meridian construction like wildfire. Madison Foster didn't show up for work. At 7:15 a.m., Patricia found an email in her inbox that made her stomach drop. Dear Ms. Hendricks, after careful consideration, I have decided that this position is not a good fit for my career goals. Please consider this my resignation effective immediately. The systems in place are far more complex than was described during my interview process. I wish you luck in finding someone better suited for these responsibilities. Sincerely, Madison Foster. Patricia stared at her computer screen in disbelief. The woman she had hired to prove that I was easily replaceable had lasted exactly 36 hours before admitting defeat and abandoning ship. She was now facing Tuesday morning with no project coordinator, no access to critical systems, and 2,000 field workers across 12 states who needed their paychecks. Jake Sullivan arrived at a construction site in Fort Worth to find 37 workers milling around the entrance gate with no idea what they were supposed to be doing. Their time cards showed scheduled work assignments, but the safety compliance system hadn't generated current certifications needed for them to enter the site. This is complete nonsense, Jake told his crew chief. We've got $1 million deadline on Friday, and nobody can tell me which equipment my guys are cleared to operate today. Similar scenes played out across Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and 9 other states where Meridian operated projects. Workers showed up to job sites without current pay stubs, which union representatives immediately flagged as potential contract violations. Safety coordinators couldn't access updated training records. Equipment operators discovered their certifications had expired in the system, making them legally unable to operate machinery. Meanwhile, Patricia frantically called every payroll processing vendor in Dallas, trying to find someone who could manually recreate the calculations that my systems had performed automatically every week for 5 years. Each conversation revealed new complications that made her head spin. Ma'am, you're talking about processing payroll for 2,000 employees across 12 different state tax jurisdictions, explained a technician from ADP. That's not something we can set up overnight. You're looking at weeks of configuration and testing before we could handle that volume safely. We don't have weeks, Patricia replied desperately. We need payroll to run today. Then you need whoever was running your old system. By 10 a.m. Tuesday, union representatives were holding emergency meetings at job sites across the Southwest. Workers who hadn't received pay stubs were threatening work stoppages until payment issues were resolved. Federal labor laws required specific documentation for interstate construction projects, and Meridian was now in violation of multiple regulations. Brenda Martinez in accounting discovered that company bank accounts had automatically frozen when payroll compliance checks failed overnight. The banking system's fraud protection protocols interpreted the missing verification codes as potential security breaches, locking down all business accounts until proper authorization could be restored. "I can't process any payments," Brenda told Patricia during an emergency meeting. "Not just payroll, but vendor payments, equipment, leases, everything. The bank won't release funds until we can provide the compliance documentation that your new system was supposed to generate." Patricia's hand shook as she realized the full scope of the disaster she had created. Direct deposit systems were rejecting all batch payments because they couldn't verify employee information against tax databases. Workers' bank accounts were showing insufficient funds for automatic bill payments because their salaries hadn't arrived as scheduled. The ripple effects spread beyond Meridian's immediate operations. Equipment rental companies began making threatening phone calls about overdue payments. Subcontractors who depended on weekly checks from Meridian started calling their lawyers about breach of contract claims. "Ms. Hendricks, this is David Torres from Premier Equipment Rental," one particularly aggressive caller announced. "Your payment is 3 days overdue, and our contract allows us to repossess equipment immediately. We're dispatching trucks to collect our machinery from your job sites unless payment is received within 2 hours." Patricia discovered that even basic functions like material ordering and equipment tracking had completely stopped working. "My systems had been integrated so deeply into every operational process that removing my access had essentially lobotomized the entire company." By Wednesday afternoon, CEO Marcus Thornfield was driving down from Houston after board members began demanding explanations for what they were hearing through industry networks. News of Meridian's operational collapse was spreading through construction circles like gossip in a small town. Competing companies sensed opportunity and began aggressively pursuing Meridian's stalled contracts. Project managers at rival firms made phone calls to clients suggesting that perhaps their projects would be safer with more stable and reliable construction partners. "I'm hearing some concerning reports about operational difficulties at your current contractor," these competitors whispered to concerned clients. "Perhaps this would be a good time to consider alternative arrangements that won't put your timeline at risk." Techstar Energy's corporate counsel called Wednesday evening with news that made Patricia's blood run cold. "Ms. Hendricks, we've completed our internal review following yesterday's compliance failures. Effective immediately, we're suspending all Meridian contracts pending a full investigation of your operational capabilities. We cannot afford to be associated with contractors who cannot meet basic regulatory requirements." The Techstar suspension triggered a domino effect throughout the industry. Other major clients began questioning their own contracts with Meridian. Trade publications started making phone calls about database dependency disasters and management failures in the digital age. As Patricia sat in her office Wednesday night, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and angry voicemails from clients' union representatives and vendors, she finally understood the magnitude of her miscalculation. The woman she had dismissed as easily replaceable had been the central nervous system of a billion-dollar operation. Without my expertise, Meridian Construction Group was not just struggling, but facing complete collapse. The most painful irony was that I had never claimed to be irreplaceable. I had simply done my job with competence and dedication, while Patricia convinced herself that expertise was just arrogance in disguise. Now she was learning the difference between confidence and competence. And the lesson was destroying everything she had worked to build. Thursday morning arrived like a funeral procession, bringing with it federal investigators who had been summoned by worker complaints about unpaid wages and safety violations. Patricia watched from her office window as official government vehicles pulled into Meridian's parking lot, carrying inspectors from the Department of Labor who would spend the day documenting the company's compliance failures. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration launched their own investigation after receiving reports about missing safety documentation from multiple job sites. When construction workers cannot access current certification records, federal law requires immediate work stoppages until compliance can be verified. Across 12 states, millions of dollars worth of projects ground to a complete halt as OSHA inspectors cordoned off work areas with yellow tape. State contractors' licensing boards in Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico opened simultaneous investigations into Meridian's regulatory violations. The company's ability to bid on government contracts hung in the balance as bureaucrats reviewed compliance failures that could result in license suspension or revocation. Local news stations caught wind of the story when union representatives held press conferences about systemic failures and worker protection violations. Channel 8's evening broadcast featured interviews with construction workers who described arriving at job sites only to be turned away because their employer couldn't provide basic documentation. "I've been with this company for 11 years, one hard hat wearing employee told the cameras. "Never seen anything like this. It's like somebody just unplugged the whole operation and nobody knows how to turn it back on." The personal consequences for Patricia escalated throughout Thursday as CEO Marcus Thornfield arrived from Houston with a face like thunder. He spent 2 hours in emergency meetings with the board of directors reviewing legal exposure reports and insurance liability assessments that painted increasingly grim pictures of the company's future. "How did you allow this to happen?" Thornfield demanded during a private meeting in Patricia's office. "How did we become entirely dependent on one employee without any backup systems or succession planning?" "I was trying to modernize our operations," Patricia replied weakly. Madison had excellent credentials and innovative ideas about streamlining processes. "Madison lasted 36 hours before she quit in panic," Thornfield shot back. "That's not modernization. That's gross incompetence disguised as management philosophy." The board of directors held an emergency conference call Thursday afternoon to discuss Patricia's immediate termination for catastrophic mismanagement resulting in operational collapse. Legal counsel advised that Patricia might face personal liability for violation of federal labor laws since she had made the decision to eliminate critical compliance systems without proper safeguards. Patricia's own salary became frozen due to the same system failures that were preventing worker paychecks. Her direct deposit account showed the same verification failed error messages that 2,000 other employees were seeing. The irony of being unable to pay herself while trying to explain to workers why they weren't getting paid was not lost on anyone. Company-wide meltdown accelerated as vendors and subcontractors realized that Meridian could not process any payments until system access was restored. Equipment rental companies dispatched repossession teams to collect machinery from job sites where payments were overdue. Concrete suppliers refused to deliver materials without cash prepayment. Electrical subcontractors walked off jobs when their weekly checks bounced. Project deadlines that had seemed manageable on Monday became impossible by Thursday. The $20 million hospital construction project in Austin faced potential litigation from the healthcare system if delays continued beyond Friday. The municipal airport expansion in Oklahoma City triggered penalty clauses worth hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. Stock prices for Meridian's publicly traded parent company plummeted. News of operational paralysis reached investment circles. Financial analysts began downgrading ratings and suggesting that the company's construction division represented unacceptable operational risk for investors. Meanwhile, I was receiving multiple job offers from competitors who had heard about my situation through industry networks. Professional headhunters were calling with lucrative opportunities at rival firms who understood exactly what kind of expertise I possessed. Word spread quickly in construction circles about the project coordinator who had single-handedly prevented system failures for years until corporate arrogance eliminated her position. "Randy, this is Jennifer Walsh from Executive Search Associates," one recruiter explained during a Thursday afternoon phone call. "We represent several major construction firms who would very much like to discuss opportunities with someone of your background and experience. The industry buzz about what's happening at Meridian has made your reputation quite valuable. I maintained dignified silence while watching developments unfold from the outside. Social media posts from former colleagues painted increasingly desperate pictures of chaos and confusion. Jake Sullivan posted a photo of workers sitting idle at a job site with the caption, "Day 4 of waiting for somebody to tell us what we're supposed to be doing." Some people are just irreplaceable no matter what management thinks. Friday morning brought the final devastating blow when Meridian's insurance company threatened to cancel coverage unless operational compliance was restored within 24 hours. Insurance cancellation would automatically terminate all active contracts worth over $200 million, since clients required continuous coverage as a condition of their agreements. Mr. Thornfield, this is Carol Peterson from Midwest Construction Insurance. Came the call that sealed Patricia's fate. Our underwriters have completed their review of recent compliance failures at your company. Unless normal operations are restored by tomorrow morning, we'll have no choice but to cancel your policy effective immediately. Thornfield stared out his office window at the news trucks gathering in the parking lot and realized that his company faced complete bankruptcy unless he could swallow his pride and beg the woman they had dismissed as easily replaceable to save them from their own arrogance. The power had completely reversed, and everyone knew it except Patricia, who was still trying to explain to investigators why eliminating critical personnel had seemed like a reasonable management decision just 5 days earlier. Saturday morning, I was enjoying coffee on my apartment balcony when my phone rang with a number I recognized but never expected to see again. Marcus Thornfield, CEO of Meridian Construction Group, was calling me personally at 8 a.m. on a weekend. I let it ring twice before answering, knowing that desperation has its own distinctive sound. "Randy, this is Marcus Thornfield," came the voice of a man who had probably not slept in days. "I'm calling to discuss a very serious situation that requires your immediate attention and expertise." "Good morning, Mr. Thornfield," I replied calmly, taking another sip of coffee while watching traffic move peacefully along the street below. "How can I help you?" "We need you back," he said without preamble. "The company is facing complete collapse, and you're the only person who understands our systems well enough to restore operations. I'm prepared to offer you triple your previous salary promotion to Vice President of Operations Stock Options and whatever other terms you consider appropriate." I let the silence stretch for a moment, giving him time to fully appreciate the situation he found himself in. Through my apartment window, I could see birds building nests in the oak tree outside, methodically gathering materials and working together toward a common goal. The contrast with Meridian's chaos was not lost on me. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. Thornfield," I said finally. "But before we discuss terms, I need to understand exactly what happened after my termination. Help me understand how a company with billions in assets became completely paralyzed in less than a week." Thornfield's explanation revealed the full scope of the disaster Patricia had created. Madison's 36-hour tenure had ended with her fleeing the building in tears. Federal investigators were threatening criminal charges for labor law violations. Insurance companies were preparing to cancel coverage. $200 million in active contracts hung in the balance. "Patricia has been terminated," Thornfield continued. "The board voted unanimously to remove her from management effective immediately. We also discovered that she had made several other questionable decisions that put the company at risk. She'll be facing potential legal action for gross negligence." "And what about the workers who haven't been paid for a week?" I asked. "What about the families depending on those paychecks for rent and groceries?" "That's exactly why we need your help," Thornfield replied urgently. "You're the only person who can restore payroll systems quickly enough to prevent further damage. We're prepared to meet any reasonable demands you have." I had spent the previous 5 days watching news coverage and social media posts that documented Meridian's complete operational collapse. Former colleagues were posting updates about chaos and confusion. Union representatives were threatening lawsuits. Competitors were poaching clients. The woman Patricia had dismissed as easily replaceable had turned out to be the only person capable of preventing institutional catastrophe. Here are my terms, I said, pulling out a notepad where I had been sketching potential requirements. Full control over systems architecture with hand-picked team members of my choosing. Flexible work arrangements, including remote options and compressed schedule. Written apology from the board of directors acknowledging the value of institutional expertise. 6 months consulting fee paid up front before I'll consider returning to active employment. Done, Thornfield replied without hesitation. Anything else? I want to personally meet with affected workers to explain what happened and apologize on behalf of management. These people trusted their livelihoods to systems I built, and they deserve to understand why those systems were disrupted. Of course, we'll arrange meetings at all job sites as soon as you're ready. And I want Patricia's termination to include a company-wide message about the importance of respecting institutional knowledge. This can't happen again to anyone else. Absolutely. When can you start? Monday morning felt different as I walked through Meridian's lobby wearing a new badge that read, Vice President of Operations. The same security guards who had escorted me out 5 days earlier now greeted me with obvious relief. Word had spread throughout the building that the crisis was finally ending. Workers throughout the office began applauding as I made my way to the elevator. Jake Sullivan was waiting by my new corner office with the biggest grin I had ever seen on his weathered face. Welcome home, boss, he said, shaking my hand warmly. We knew you'd be back. Some people are just too important to stay gone. Brenda Martinez from accounting was practically in tears as she hugged me in the hallway. I've never been so happy to see someone in my entire life, she said. The past week has been absolute hell without you. The technical restoration took less than 4 hours. Systems that had been paralyzed for a week came back online as soon as I entered my authorization codes and restored proper database connections. Payroll calculations that had seemed impossible to Madison ran automatically once the proper credentials were in place. Safety compliance reports generated instantly. Equipment tracking resumed normal operation. By Tuesday afternoon, direct deposits were flowing into workers' accounts across 12 states. Jake's crew received their updated assignments and returned to productive work. Equipment rental companies received their overdue payments and canceled repossession orders. The hospital project in Austin resumed construction with the minimal additional delays. Patricia's office was being cleaned out under security supervision when I passed by on Tuesday afternoon. She looked broken and defeated as she packed personal items into the same type of cardboard box I had carried just a week earlier. Our eyes met briefly through the glass window, and I saw recognition of her terrible miscalculation written across her face. The industry fallout followed predictably. Patricia struggled to find new employment as word spread about her role in Meridian's near collapse. Her resume now included termination for gross negligence, making her essentially unemployable in construction management. The lessons she learned about respecting institutional knowledge came at the cost of her entire career. Madison Foster found an appropriate entry-level position at a smaller firm where her business school theories could be applied to less complex operations. She sent me a LinkedIn message apologizing for her role in the chaos and acknowledging that she had been completely unprepared for the complexity of what I managed daily. The supporting characters who had shown me loyalty were rewarded appropriately. Brenda Martinez received promotion to Patricia's former position, becoming the new department head with substantial salary increases. Jake Sullivan was given company recognition for his loyalty and received bonuses for the disruption his crews had endured. Workers across all job sites received back pay plus additional bonuses to compensate for the stress and uncertainty they had experienced. Company-wide meetings were held to explain what had happened and assure everyone that proper succession planning would prevent future disruptions. Meridian's corporate culture underwent significant transformation in the weeks following my return. New policies were implemented, requiring detailed documentation of all critical systems and cross-training programs to prevent future single points of failure. Investment in proper knowledge management systems ensured that institutional expertise would be preserved rather than dismissed. The recognition programs for employees with specialized knowledge became company-wide initiatives. Management training included modules about identifying and respecting institutional knowledge rather than assuming that fresh credentials automatically translated to superior capability. Personal growth came naturally as I settled into my new leadership role. The experience taught me never again to accept being undervalued or dismissed by people who didn't understand the complexity of my contributions. I developed mentorship programs for young professionals, helping them build expertise while documenting their knowledge for organizational continuity. Relationships with colleagues at all levels became stronger and more collaborative. The crisis had demonstrated clearly who understood the value of teamwork versus those who were primarily concerned with personal advancement at others' expense. Leadership opportunities emerged as other companies sought my expertise in building robust operational systems. Speaking engagements at industry conferences allowed me to share lessons about knowledge management and succession planning. My reputation grew beyond Meridian to encompass the broader construction industry. The profound life lesson that emerged from this experience centers on authentic versus superficial value in professional settings. True replaceability isn't about having impressive credentials on paper or knowing the latest business school buzzwords. It's about understanding that every person brings unique value through their experience, relationships, and deep knowledge of how complex systems actually function in real-world conditions. The most dangerous mistake leaders make is confusing what looks impressive in interviews with what actually keeps organizations running smoothly day after day. When you dismiss someone as easily swappable, you might discover that what you perceived as routine work was actually irreplaceable expertise disguised as everyday competence. Patricia's downfall demonstrated that arrogance and institutional knowledge are incompatible. She convinced herself that eliminating my position would prove her management superiority, but instead revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of what made the organization successful. Her eagerness to replace proven competence with theoretical innovation nearly destroyed everything she was trying to improve. Madison's brief tenure illustrated that credentials without context are worthless in complex operational environments. Business school theories work beautifully in classroom scenarios, but often fail catastrophically when applied to systems built over years of practical experience and regulatory compliance requirements. The workers who suffered during this crisis deserved better leadership than Patricia provided. Their livelihoods became casualties of a management philosophy that valued appearances over substance. The real crime wasn't Patricia's professional incompetence, but her callous disregard for how her decisions would affect the families depending on Meridian for their financial security. My response to their desperation taught me about the power of maintaining dignity during professional crises. By refusing to gloat or seek revenge when they needed my help, I demonstrated that true leadership means putting organizational needs above personal satisfaction. The satisfaction came naturally from seeing problems solved and people returning to productive work. The ending brings complete emotional satisfaction because justice was served through natural consequences rather than artificial punishment. Patricia's career destruction resulted directly from her own poor decisions and character flaws. Madison's humiliation came from her overconfidence and dismissive attitude toward experienced professionals. My triumph felt earned because I had maintained professional standards throughout the crisis. The company's transformation proves that organizations can learn from catastrophic failures if leadership acknowledges mistakes and implements meaningful changes. Meridian became stronger and more resilient because they finally understood the difference between innovation and destruction, between modernization and reckless change management. Workers across the company gained new appreciation for institutional knowledge and the people who possess it. The crisis created lasting cultural changes that will protect future employees from similar management disasters. Everyone learned valuable lessons about recognizing and respecting expertise, regardless of how humble its packaging might appear. Looking back, Patricia's assertion that I was easily replaceable proved to be the most expensively wrong statement in Meridian's corporate history. The 36 hours between my termination and Madison's resignation cost the company millions of dollars and nearly destroyed their reputation in the construction industry. The lesson about authentic value versus superficial credentials became permanently embedded in their corporate culture. My journey from humiliation to triumph demonstrates that competence always reveals itself eventually, especially when incompetence tries to replace it. The quiet dignity I maintained during the crisis served me better than any argument or confrontation could have. Sometimes the most powerful response to being undervalued is simply allowing reality to prove your worth. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone in authority dismissed your contributions as unnecessary only to discover later how much they depended on your expertise? Share your story in the comments below about times when people learned the hard way that certain knowledge and experience can't be easily replaced. If this story resonated with your own workplace experiences, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about people who proved their worth when others tried to diminish them. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who's ever been told they're easily replaceable, but knew better. Thank you for listening to this story, and I hope it reminds you that authentic value always finds a way to shine through even when others try to dim your light.